In this video, we will be demonstrating Informer 5, the next generation of our powerful Agile reporting and analytics tool. Version 5 incorporates powerful new features such as data governance, data discovery, and collaboration within a clean and intuitive user interface. Informer is completely web-based, so the only software your users need in order to use it is a web browser. Access is controlled through a username and password combination. User accounts can be managed locally in Informer, or you can use your Active Directory or standard LDAP repository. Other repositories can be used with Informer by way of its extensible architecture. For the first part of our demo today, I will be using our administrator account. Once I log in, my user experience is controlled through Informer's robust security, which determines what functionality I have as well as the data that I have access to. Since I'm using the administrator account, I will have full access to the system and can see and do everything. Later I will log in as a normal user to show how they would view content in Informer. Connections to databases are done through data sources. Informer supports most of the standard SQL-based databases, as well as Rocket Software's U2 database line, Unidata, and Universe. Other databases may be added in future updates. Once connected, Informer scans the database for a list of tables and columns. Links are used to define relationships between tables. For example, you may be working with a list of students and need to get the registered courses from another table. In Informer, you can define the relationship between these tables as a link, giving users access to the data they need. You can even define relationships between tables in different databases. Access to data sources are controlled by sharing them to teams of users who can begin to develop their own data sets and other content from it. A data set is a snapshot of data that can come from either a query that is ran against one of your data sources or from data that you've dragged into the system, such as a spreadsheet or CSV file, or from data pulled through a REST or Cloud API. Creating a data set from a data source can be done with Informer's intuitive Query Designer or by using native query language. Using the Query Designer is as simple as specifying the fields you want, adding the necessary criteria, and applying any necessary flow steps. Flow steps are processed as each record is streamed into Informer, allowing you to scrub your data for errors or derive other columns from existing ones. You can share access to datasets with your teams much in the same way you can data sources. Each team member has a role assigned to them that controls what they can do with things shared to the team. So some members may only have the ability to view existing content, where others may be able to create new content, and yet others can then share that content with other teams. Users can interact with the shared data set in a number of ways. They can do simple things like sort or group. They can create summaries of the data in pivot tables. With the Informer Discover tool, users can quickly create visuals that can be saved and reused in reports or accessed externally in other sites. Now let's look at a real-world example of how you might use Informer 5 at your institution. In this example, we're going to be looking at admissions data to track how well we're doing in receiving new applicants into our university. So I've created a data set that lists all of the applications that we've received, And these are applications we received over a long period of time. And I've listed useful information about those applicants and their applications to be able to analyze them. And I can modify that data set using the query designer that I used to create it initially. And I can add additional fields if I like, or I can add criteria if I want to further narrow the data set down. And then here are my flow steps. So we have several on here. I have one that converts a zip code to a geographical location, which we can see over here. I have a power script that fills out some missing data because my data was incomplete, and therefore I use the flow steps to fill in those missing gaps. And then I have another simple one that calculates the age of the applicant based on the application date and their birth date, giving their age. So once I've created that data set, then I want to give ownership of that data set to the admissions team so that they're able to create their own content and do what they need with this data set. I can also share it out to other users and teams to allow them to work with it, but in this case I want the admissions team to own this data since it's their data anyway. So I'm going to log in as someone who is in the admissions group. And I can go to my data sets. And here I have my applications data set. So now I can start working with it and analyzing that data. So if I'm the admissions director, for example, I might want to come in here and create a little simple pivot table that I can analyze the data based on maybe gender. So it gives me a count of each gender. And then in my columns, I may want to look at load intent. So I can see how, whether I'm getting full-time, part-time, half-time, or other, how many students I have, or applicants that I have there. I can also use this pivot table, or excuse me, the Discover tool, and start creating some useful content here as well. So I can just start selecting columns from my data, and Informa will suggest some visuals that may be helpful for me to get started in visualizing my data. I can interact with these visuals just by clicking on the pie chart, for example, and drilling into the data underneath it. I can also change the chart type if I want to make it a bar chart or some other type of chart. And then I can save that to my data set that allows me to reuse it later for other reports and other dashboards, for example. And then here we have a pivot table as well, so I might save that one. So when you select data from this field chooser, it is sensitive to the data in it. So for example, Informa will recognize that a field named state is probably something having to do with a geographical location like state. So it creates a map, a heat map of the United States. And then again, I can save that to my visuals.